Lori Wolff, how are you?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing swimmingly. Pumped to talk to you. What is your official title at the state government? We're talking about a lot of economic stuff, but introduce yourself.
I'm the Administrator of Division of Financial Management. I'm the Governor Little's budget director. So we pull together the executive budget for the state of Idaho, work with the legislature, present that budget, and work with them to get a budget set for the state.
Now, look, me being the idiot, I always thought it was the legislature that determined all of the spending in the state, right? It's like you have different committees, you have education, you have, you have all kinds of stuff, right? And then they're like, okay, we should do this or we should do that. But in reality, what also happens is the governor puts out his budget, which is essentially his big ask, which is, hey, I would like this funding to go to these things and supply. And then, we have a certain amount of tax revenue and whatnot and revenue from other places. And that all goes into the bucket. And then slowly people agree to things or not agree to things. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. The governor's the chief executive budget officer for the state, is outlined in the Constitution. But the legislature does make the appropriations. They make the decisions on that. So exactly what you said. We present the budget. The governor determines what, revenue he believes are coming into the state. We have economists who work in our office. We put together what state agencies need, the investments or the appropriations we need to keep the government running, present that to the legislature, and they make a decision on what we're going to spend.
Great. There's a lot in the budget. We're not going to cover all of it today. But for instance, I had Jeff Raybould in, who's the chairman of the Water Board, eight people on the Water Board that direct the Department of Water Resource and direct how people engage with water in the state, distribution of that resource. And Governor Little has put a line item for like a $30 million recurring investment into water. So the legislature then has to go and pass that. They have to say yeah, okay, you can have the $30 million on a recurring basis.
Exactly.
Got it. You and I got connected because I read something about how the economy and job growth in Idaho is actually number one in the country. And I got really pumped about that. When I sat down with Governor Little, he talked a lot about trying to invest, he likes the launch program. And I was trying to understand okay, why? Why are you spending money to, fill in-demand jobs? Shouldn't the in-demand jobs just fill themselves? Because theoretically, if it's in demand, we have economic forces that would increase pay or increase, benefits or whatever it is to entice people to come in. And he said that he's met so many people in the state of Idaho who have children born and raised here. They love the state and they just economically don't have a place here. And he was we need to stop that. We need to have a robust market that can support our young people, not just people moving here to retire or whatever it might be, but we need to have an economy where people can be born and raised here and stay here and thrive. And then I saw this report that was oh, we're actually number one in job growth or something. So you and I got connected. Talk to me about this. What's going on with the economy?
Yeah, Idaho, it is pretty impressive when you see all of the things happening in Idaho. Probably why a lot of people want to move here. Right. But sometimes those great successes bring about challenges. A couple of things that I think, you probably read and we watch, where we have some of the top job growth in the entire country. Number 2 economy in both outlook and performance when rated against all the other states. We're number 1 in GDP growth over the last 5 years. Our income growth is up there in the top 2 for household income growth. So we have a lot of really good things going for us. And I think some of the investments that we've made or appropriations, infrastructure things that we've done over the last 5 years have contributed to that. We've had a really strong economy. We recovered really quickly from the pandemic. But we also have a ton of people moving here. We've been in the top 3 for population growth over the last few years. So I think with programs like Launch, and why is that an economic development kind of initiative or strategy? Well,
could I ask a question real fast? I'm sorry to interrupt. I want to hear about Launch, but before I forget, when there was a large commentary after the pandemic that we all went through, there was a large commentary that people were celebrating. They're oh, we have all this job growth. But what a lot of people came to find out after the fact is oh, you're talking about Starbucks workers. You're not talking about valuable jobs, or excuse me, Starbucks workers are valuable jobs, but you're not talking about jobs that could perhaps support a family. Things like that. You're talking about lower end, like service and luxury oriented jobs, right? Like nail salons or something like that had to close down. So although you have that, we might be number one job growth, but these are meaningful jobs as well, right? Because we're like ranked top 2 in wage growth as well, right? Like our median income through the jobs is increasing as well.
Exactly. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of not just people move here, but corporations move here. We see the huge micron growth going on. We have huge development happening, lots of construction jobs. Lots of large companies coming here because we have favorable tax cuts tax policies.
Sure.
We've made record tax cuts over the last several years, and these are meaningful jobs and people can make a living. I think the challenge is, and we heard this for a couple of years. In fact, I spent a couple of years at our HR division, and we were having a really hard time recruiting and retaining for these positions. So we have these jobs open, but do we have people to fill them? And do we have qualified people to fill them? Because you can't just say, oh yeah, I want to go be a nurse. We've got tons of nursing positions open. Do we have people qualified? Engineers. We have a lot of jobs in robotics, particularly with Micron development and their huge expansion. So there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of job growth. And part of that strategy is being able to have people who can fill those jobs and who are qualified. And then to your point, I have a son who's second year in college and he's trying to decide what he wants to do, wants to stay in Idaho, wants to have a career in Idaho. And I want him to fill one of those meaningful jobs and be able to raise a family and afford a home. So how do we marry those two? All this great economic development and economic growth and strength in our economy with the people who are living here prepared to take those jobs and ready to move into those positions.
Love that. Okay. And I'm sorry, I cut you off when you were talking about the launch program.
Well, I think that's one of the initiatives. And I think it was, the governor had great foresight for this, particularly in a time when we were having huge recruitment and retention, lots of jobs unfilled, not as many people entering the labor market as jobs were being created, like those that was off.
Right.
So with launch, the idea was, well, let's find what the economy is going to need in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and let's start getting our young kids prepared to take those jobs. And it's not only on the education side with the go-on rate, which is the outcome we all want out of public schools, right? We want people to go on and fill these jobs, but it's an economic growth factor. And it's being prepared so that companies will move here. We've got computer scientists, we've got robotics, we've got welders, we've got all of these different individuals ready to move into those jobs quickly.
One of the, excuse me, I think it was Representative Hill was telling me we were talking about the launch program. This was last year, but every dollar, isn't there like a multiplying factor? Like every dollar that goes into supporting an in-demand job, like it pumps back X, like 2X or 3X back into the economy?
Oh, absolutely. I didn't bring those numbers with me today, but
I remember him telling you, I was like, wow, that's a lot of money. He's like, incredible. Yeah, like if you can get people to utilize these programs, there's a direct correlation to, investment. And I know some people are like, hey, government shouldn't be making investments. Like, okay, maybe, we make investments in infrastructure or whatnot, or programs that are going to decrease our overall, budget expenses on an annual basis. So like we make investments, right? And when we're talking about spending tax dollars, if you have a multiplier, obviously it's like, okay, for every one tax dollar we get put in here, we're going to get 5 more, right? So absolutely. It's like, if you don't at least attempt to make that, it's almost like you're just walking away from free money.
Absolutely. Well, and it doesn't promote growth if you're not doing that, right? If we all just want to stay where we're at and not have any growth and not have any expansion or not be able to modernize and keep this strong economy rolling, there's reasons why we're getting those outcomes. And it's not because we're sitting on our hands. Yeah. It's because we're investing in those things that are going to build an opportunity for that future.
Well, I shouldn't say free money. Look, if you're making an investment, any dollar, any penny spent by the government is a penny earned by someone, right, and then taken away. And that's not free. So again, I don't mean to misspeak
Well,
with that.
I'm actually glad you said that, because I think, I've worked in government for more than 20 years now, and that's absolutely right. This isn't government's money. This is taxpayers' money. Right. And there's a reason why we take our jobs so seriously when we put these budgets together. It's the things that are important to the people who are paying into it. That's why public schools, that's why roads, that's why, our water resources, so we have a strong ag community. Right. That's why we put money in fire, because we want to protect not only our wildlands, but, when we watch what's happening in California, people want their lands and their investments protected. And they look to government to create an infrastructure, to create a system where we feel like we can live and thrive.
Right. Speaking of, I was actually speaking with Jeff Raybould, who, again, is chairman of the Water Board yesterday. And I just commentary off as we were getting going. I'm like, hey, I think it's just really important for people to understand how important water is to, our ag and our economy. And he stopped me. He was like, it's important to everyone.
Everybody.
And I'm like, yeah, I guess. He's like, no, man. He was like, listen, you don't have water. You don't have the ag economy. You don't have housing development. You don't have recreation. And instantly I thought about, I really like camping, right? So I was going camping years back, and we were passing Shasta and back in California. I remember there was this like mega drought year where all of the reservoirs were like, all the floating docks were just on the ground. Like they were not floating at all. Like all of these reservoirs had dropped considerably, and you really do lose, like, not just ag economy, but like you lose opportunities to recreate in the state. You lose these great resources that people have looked on. Like I grew up going to Briones Reservoir and like swim team camping trips and stuff, and water skiing, and
absolutely
all got hammered.
I grew up in Salmon, and we do tons of whitewater rafting. Those years when the rivers are too low to float, it affects the entire industry and everybody's summer plans, because that's what we love to do, right? Same with our lakes and reservoirs. But you're right. It impacts everybody.
There is nothing better than floating a river.
Right? It's the best.
Floating the Boise River is fantastic. Do you, who I need to get a hold of is, I think Chanel Dixon. She's the the director of the Department of, ag. Is she the ag department director?
You're thinking Chanel T-Walt.
T-Walt, yes. Not Dixon. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Same Chanel though, right? It's Chanel. A Chanel. Okay, I got the first name.
Yes, and she's amazing.
Yeah, she's fantastic. And she was working specifically against the quagga, mussel problem invasion. Yes. And everyone that I knew that I was like, hey, what is this? They're like, oh, it's really, really bad. Like we can't let these get in. And then anyone's like, why? Why is it bad? They're like, oh, it's just bad. I'm like, wait, why? And again, doing a little more research, I'm like, oh, it clogs like every irrigation pipe. It destroys waterways for flow. So like imagine floating down the Boise River, and especially the areas that are pretty shallow. Imagine having like razor blades like underneath your feet when you have to it would just destroy the entire recreation area.
Yes. Yeah. And she did a phenomenal job addressing that issue in Idaho. Again, another investment we had to make last year to make sure we clean that up. But yeah, she's great.
Yeah, it would have destroyed our irrigation systems as well, right?
Absolutely.
Like if we were trying to...
And it spread so quickly, which is why it was so important to jump on that and get that problem figured out.
Oh my gosh. Chanel, holler at me. I want to talk about this.
Yes.
Bring
her in.
Yeah. One other thing that I think is important to point out. So I do a lot of podcasts with law enforcement individuals. And for me personally, okay. Obviously, whatever, out of sight, out of mind. But when you're focusing on things a lot, you obviously start thinking about them a lot. Nothing I'm saying here is profound. I'm doing a horrible job of explaining this. But for instance, I had Mike Moralia, a former detective in Boise, in yesterday to talk about automatic license plate readers. And he was articulating all of these instances where either the license plate readers had helped solve crimes, or they would have been instrumental in solving crimes in cases of murder or kidnapping, like all these terrible things. It's like, oh my gosh. And it's been weighing heavily on me because as I've been focusing more on this, it's like, wow, there's a lot of crime. Like there's crime everywhere. Well, it turns out that's not true. I'm just talking to people a lot about it.
A lot about it.
Because again, one of the other things that I think needs to be pointed out is we are dealing with a golden age of crime and enforcement. We're decreasing our crime overall, but we're decreasing violent crimes exceptionally, like by an order of magnitude. That's accurate, right?
That is accurate. In fact, in
Oh, look at you. You got
I
this.
know. I brought some. I think we even with our record population growth, crime is down 17%, and violent crime is 5 times less than it was 5 years ago. Which, when you talk to people in different areas and you hear some of the things that you're dealing with, I mean, I was down in Vegas and I watched people walking in the Walgreens there, grabbing boxes of food and walking out, and nobody did anything. That's another thing that's so great here. We invest in our public safety. We do whatever we can to make sure not only are we paying them, but they have good equipment to be able to fight crime. But at the end of the day, people feel safe here. I mean, there's days I don't even lock my door at night. I feel perfectly safe. Now, there's always going to be some crime, but I think that leads to that quality of life and the things that people really care about, which is, I can go for a walk at night and not be scared something's going to happen to me. I trust that law enforcement's going to come and show up when I need them. And, it makes for safer schools, safer communities, safer areas.
Yeah, safer everything. My neighbor across the street, he actually moved, but he was my original neighbor. He had a truck that he left the keys in the car unlocked all day, every day. One day he was like, "Hey, can you move my truck for some reason?" I was like, "Oh yeah, sure." He texted me. He's like, "Can you move it?" I was like, "Yeah, where are your keys?" He's like, "They're in the truck." I'm like, "No, I'll go to the truck. Where's like?" He's like, "The keys are in the cup holder in the truck." Now again, this guy has since moved, right? Like, and he just didn't, and nothing ever happened. Now, I'm not saying like that's always a great idea,
right?
But anyway, so bottom line is crime is dropping statewide. Like, what do you attribute that to? Like, what investments, what has gone on to actually do that? I mean, obviously, I assume we have a very, very successful and supported law enforcement community, but is there anything directly that has been invested in that has led to this?
Well, we have, since I've worked with Governor Little, we've had record investments in public safety. And it's not just in your police troopers, right? I mean, you've got to invest all the way across. You got to invest in your troopers or your law enforcement. You've got to invest in courts. You've got to make sure that you have good prosecutors, good public defenders. You'll see some money for public defense this year, quite a bit. You've got to have, good funding for prisons and jails, because if that whole continuum isn't there, then you're not doing yourself any favor in being able to hold people accountable. But then also, it goes back to the laws and the statutes of our state and making sure that we have high standards for how we expect our citizens to live. And we have to be responsive. I think that's one of the complaints you hear from a lot of states where they don't feel safe is I can call law enforcement and they don't even show up. Or I tried to prosecute and they wouldn't even take it to court. But here, people know that we will respond because there's a high standard of morality and a high standard of how we behave and how we treat each other.
That is great. And speaking of the legislation, there was again, I think it was Representative Hill passed that mandatory minimums for fentanyl last year, which included in it, I believe, the stipulation that if you were a drug dealer, you dealt fentanyl or some drug laced with fentanyl to an individual, the individual took it and died, then if they could find out who the drug dealer was, the drug dealer would be charged with murder, right. Which was, again, it was like, wow, man, they're giving law enforcement the tools to really get after this stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, fentanyl is the governor invested in the fentanyl takes all. We put a lot of resources into that. We're seeing the impacts of that on our young kids. We're seeing the impacts of that on families.
What's the fentanyl takes all?
So funding to educate and awareness, particularly for our kids at that young age about, what should you be worried about or what should you be watching for or what kind of combating those messages that they're going to be hearing from their peer groups. And, like we've done with, whether it's smoking or drinking or other drugs, right. But being really aware of fentanyl because it came so quickly and it was coming across the border so quickly. And then he also invested in, I think he said that our state made more trips to the border than any other state outside of those borders.
Sure.
Trying to also help. Like, we don't want those drugs coming across. We want to protect our kids, and trained a lot of law enforcement here to make sure that we were doing what we could on our roads and our highways and whatever is happening in terms of transporting those drugs and stopping that. So again, it's a system, and
Gotcha.
investing in all of that has been top priority.
Is there something in the budget this year? Is there an ask or a line item for enhanced law enforcement or for investing in law enforcement in general?
The Idaho State Police budget will be part of the budget. They
Gotcha.
do have an increase this year. We do have some investments there. And a lot of it, sometimes there's big initiatives and big things that they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
We've invested in some of the missions that they've gone on, and additional training will continue to do that, investing in post, making sure we're getting more officers so that, we don't have shortages. We've invested in pay, making sure that, we can pay our officers
Sure.
so they'll stay. But also a lot of it is making sure they have good equipment. They have, the right uniforms and vests and all of the things that they need. We just did a tour out there a couple of weeks ago, and they walked through like how they equip their cars in order for them to, they've got cameras and they've got computers and all the things that they need there to make sure that they have the right equipment. And we have stuff in the budget every year trying to make sure that we're staying up on exactly what law enforcement needs to be successful. So there's more in the budget this year for that as well.
Gotcha. Listen, I know I don't want to keep you. I know today's a working day. We've touched on a couple things, crime and economy in general. Is there anything else you'd like to hit on now? And I'd love to have you back, but I'm trying to be sensitive of your time.
No, I appreciate it. Well, I think, it's really easy to say, oh, government spends too much money. We using taxpayers, and look at this budget. It just increased this much. And those are important. Nobody complains, or nobody will say, don't put money into our roads.
Right.
Don't put money into water. Don't put money into schools. The other thing that I think is important to know about Idaho is we have the highest per capita tax cuts since Governor Little took office. And this year in the budget, there was $100 million set aside for even more tax cuts. So it's that balance in state government where we have to take care of the things that the citizens expect us to do, right? We want to be able to have outdoor recreation. We want good parks. We want strong law enforcement. We want good schools. And when we have invested there appropriately, we also give money back. And we've done that in property tax relief, grocery tax credit, income tax, corporate tax relief. So, and we're doing that again next year. And I think that's an important balance too, when you're talking about how this government runs.
God bless it. Lori, thank you for coming in today.
Thank you.
Please come back. Let's keep digesting through what Idaho is doing well and what we're looking to spend money on. Because again, I agree with you. People don't like spending money, and they certainly don't like somebody spending their money.
Right.
I appreciate that. But I also like when I pick up the phone, the police show up, or, the fire department shows up or something like that. So understanding where each of the dollars is going helps me just understand, like, okay, we do have some degree of fiscal responsibility, right? And that I sleep a little bit better with that. So thank you for taking the time today.
Thank you.
Please do come back.
Love to.